Welcome to Life by Design. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this space for real conversations about how we live, how we show up day in and day out, because the quality of our life is shaped by our habits. What we do in ordinary time allows us to be extraordinary. We can unpack what it takes to truly live well and be well in real life. Welcome to Life by Design. And I'm just so excited that you are here. Welcome back to Life by Design. On today's episode, I had the opportunity to interview Dr. Ross Ellenhorn. He is by far the most refreshing approach and outlook when it comes to addiction and mental health and mental illness. He's somebody who's been in this field over 2 decades, creating programs and supports that allow people to find hope in situations that sometimes feel a little bit hopeless. So for folks who are thinking about emotional health, mental health, addictions, we cover a lot of ground here. I'll let you know that there's a lot of those conversations in this conversation. I hope this is useful. And again, this conversation is, I think, so important because it's really anchoring the place of hope in mental health. Stay tuned. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ross. We're so excited to spend time with you today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Amazing. Now, Dr. Ross, I have been watching your work, going through your work, and I just find your approach is so refreshing in this space around well-being and mental health, emotional health. And I was hoping you can tell our listeners just a wee bit about the good work that you're up to these days.
I have a program that's called Ellenhorn that's been around for 20 years that really believes in helping people recover their social being when they've had kind of significant psychiatric events. It's really kind of the missing element in a lot of ways in psychiatric care, including what psychiatric care has done to people by making them kind of feel broken, like failures, like treatment never works. And so this program is really about how to help people kind of rebuild themselves socially. That's almost more important on some level than rebuilding themselves psychiatrically. The psychiatric becomes more simple once they're willing and able to participate in treatment, but that means that they've built some sense of pride and sense of self-worth to do it. So that's kind of the model. It's a hospital without walls. It's the most intensive community integration program in the United States. So we meet every morning. There's psychiatrists on staff, nursing, and then there's all kinds of other people that are helping people kind of work and go back to school and things like that.
Yeah, Dr. Ross, one of the things that really stands out for your work to me is that you have identified such an important element, as you've already described, in terms of psychiatric care, and very much this idea of the role of hope within it. And as somebody who studies hope, one of the areas which, when I'm working with families, communities, organizations, is this idea that when we're talking about psychiatric conditions, so often hope is absent from those conversations. And I just appreciate so very much how you have created this program, again, 2 decades in the making, that is bringing hope into the conversation, because I think how a lot of folks talk about psychiatric conditions right now, hope isn't there.
Yeah. So let's start. So let's start. You do a lot of work on hope. So let's start with just if we're in the same place when we think about what hope is. So how would you describe it? And then I'll describe how I think of it, if that's okay.
Yeah. So how I talk about hope is this idea that it is a state that allows us to show up even in uncertainty, even when we aren't attached to an outcome, but it's an underlying action that allows us to essentially trust that somehow this is going to work out. I think the differentiator I often share with folks is that when we think of hope, I think a lot of folks get attached to the idea of optimism, which is this like attached to an outcome specific, where I think hope is what makes us show up for a therapy session, trusting on some level this is going to offer some support, or even, going out for a walk in the morning, trusting that that walk and being outside in nature is going to bring some relief to a busy day. So it's the mindset, it's the action, it's just getting us started to trust that we can figure things out.
Yeah. That's pretty close to mine. You're really talking about a version of hope, and probably the version of hope that I think Martin Luther King probably best articulated in his work. That he was really talking about not always the outcome, but will we sort of be ourselves at the other end of it, and will there be something good that comes out of it? The way I would put it, which is very similar to you, is that it is the mindset that gets us through uncertainty to something that we feel is important, whether we get there or not. But there is no other word for that mindset, the mindset that moves us through uncertainty towards something we're yearning for.
Yes.
And so that sets up a dynamic, which is that the thing that we're yearning for becomes sort of important to us, more important to us than if we had not hoped for it. So
exactly.
it appoints importance to things. And that means that it also is a dangerous act, because if you don't achieve those things, you end up feeling like you didn't get what was life-giving. So it's not like disappointment, like, that movie was disappointing or that meal was disappointing. It's a kind of profound, helpless disappointment when you don't get to the thing that you were hoping for. And for all of us, we all struggle with that. That's why hope is difficult. Optimism is easy. Optimism is just this sort of cheap thing, but that's what makes hope a matter of courage and a matter of fortitude, that it takes a certain ability to face the fear that you'll hit that disappointment. And what I think is going on for all of us, but for psychiatric patients in particular, especially ones that have been in and out of the system, is that they've had these massive experiences of disappointment over and over again, beginning with a massive one. They're in college, they're doing fine, and all of a sudden life gets taken from them.
Yes.
So what's the thing that got them to that disappointment? Hope did. Yeah. So hope becomes tied to disappointment. And so they begin to fear hoping, because hope is always this thing that can bring them there. So staying the same becomes their main mechanism for struggling with that. It's actually go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's such a complicated dynamic, because and again, I know you coined that term, that idea about fear of hope. And one of the things that, again, when I'm working in community, it's that I think there's very much this collective idea of, if we're scared to get our hopes up, and it's the people who once have been able to hope, they've experienced setbacks, disappointments, they have been let down by systems. There's an injustice to this. And they're the ones that actually get hit. I think the hardest are the folks who actually at one point did get their hopes up, did trust a treatment, did trust a process, did trust in something, and it didn't end up the way that they hoped, or they were worse off because that they did get their hopes up. So now folks are scared to hope that things are going to work out. And I feel this is just so exacerbated with psychiatric communities, because they, I think, they've gotten the brunt of this very much so.
That's very true. And so what this means, though, is that a person we might designate as hopeless might not be hopeless. They might be fearing hope.
That's right.
And so then we have a third category. We have despair, we have hope, and we have fear of hope. And that doesn't mean the person doesn't have hope. And our research shows something really interesting, which is that the people that are most perturbed by fear of hope are ones that rate as high hope and have high fear of hope. Because it's like being afraid of heights and you're standing on a cliff.
Yes. And
so we might say that's a person in despair, when in reality, they've got a significant amount of this sense of wanting something and kind of believing themselves to get there. And then this terror about hoping. Yes. And so it's a mediator to hope. It's something that can make hope not happen, even if it's there. That's what our research has shown.
Yeah, Dr. Ross, that's that is so unique in the sense that it's easy, I think, to say, oh, those hopeless people, they just don't have it. Where it's no, they actually have the highest ratings of it. And they are fear-filled because of what life experience has taught them. So my question would be, especially when we think of someone with, let's even start with, somebody who's experienced seasons of depression or pretty substantive anxiety, where do we even show up for them as supporters, as family members, numbers, like what things do you see are where we can really put our focus and our energy to support people? And again, I appreciate there's many levels and depths and context and whatnot, but just as a bystander to the people that we care about in our lives, where do we start?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that there are plenty of people that have psychiatric diagnoses that don't have that significant a problem with fear of hope.
Right.
And they get help, and the help works because they're ready for it, because they're ready to hope. So you can have depression and go to a therapist and really engage in your therapy. But then there are people that sadly are called resistant in our system or in denial, when that's not really what's happening. They're doing something. And one of the things that I think is important is first to recognize what they're doing when they don't change. And they're doing something very graceful. They're protecting their hope.
Yes.
So they're doing something that makes sense by staying the same. It's not like they're doing something disturbing. They're saying, look, if I try again, there may be less hope at the end of this. And I don't want this to happen. So number one is to have some level of respect for that. And number two is to find ways for them to build a greater sense of what's called self-efficacy, a sense that they have some control over their lives.
Yes.
Because what you need to know is that if there's a disappointment, you can handle it.
Yeah. That
you can pick yourself up, that you have enough faith in yourself to do that. So there's that other religious term is faith. You really can't get a person to hope more necessarily, but you can get them to have enough faith in themselves to handle the disappointment. So faith is the thing to work on. Faith in themselves. Yeah. I can do it. Faith in others. They can help me. And that can be faith in you as a therapist, but also them doing things in their lives, actually achieving things in their lives that make them feel some level of pride and dignity, because that's the thing that's going to drive them through. That's basically what we think works. Yeah. Spending a lot of time telling a person how to get to change or prognosticating about them or anything like that is counter to all this. It doesn't do any 100%. Good. Yeah. And then, like I said before, respecting what they're doing, that staying the same makes sense, and having conversations where there's no judgment about that,
I what's coming to me, I remember years ago when I was working in the addiction space, I remember often hearing folks when we were in counseling sessions would say to me that, like, they know that they would, let's just use the expression, like, kick this habit or, address this addiction at some point. They knew that they wanted to, they knew that they could, but they would say to me things like, Robyne, I don't want to take that shot right now. I thought that was so interesting, putting that with what you're saying, is that they had this hope that one day I'll be able to move on from this addiction or learn different coping strategies, change my behavior. So it was almost as if they had this like golden ticket that in the future that they knew there'd be one day they would be able to do it. And it's almost as if they didn't want to waste their shot, Dr. Ross, because they weren't ready for it yet. And what you're sharing in that overlap to me seems like a very interesting perspective.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because another person might call that stinking thinking. Like, okay, they're talking themselves out of doing it right now by saying they'll do it later. Yeah. But what they're really saying is, I'm really scared of hoping right now. I'm trying to rebuild my hope, and I'll do it later. There might be some sense to it. But addiction has just an awful history in this, because it really, really does describe a relapse as a failure. Yes. So you have failed. You are a failure when that happens. Instead of defining it as the most expected outcome of any treatment is relapse. 100%. Right? And so why aren't we living in a world where that expected outcome is part of our treatment, where we're not describing a person as, you're done, now you're sober, and now you got to do the work, but how do we think about what happens when you relapse? Yes. And do we have to think of a relapse as the moment where you start getting into an addictive cycle? That's actually not true. They've done the research on the brain. Yes. If an alcoholic drinks a beer, nothing happens in the brain where they start becoming addicted again. Again, exactly. So that story is kind of false. The story that you'll just sort of fall into this hell if you use. Yes. You probably know this. The moderation story is false. That's right. People can moderate. Most people moderate. The treatment story is false. Most people, sometimes it works. people who never go to treatment but become sober have a longer enduring sobriety than people who go to treatment. Yes. So there's all kinds of stuff out there that's about kind of, you fail if you don't go to treatment. Something's wrong with you, you don't go to treatment. You fail here, you fail here. It's all these stories about it. And more than someone with a mental illness, it's happening repeatedly because they're using repeatedly, because most treatments don't actually work. And the most likely outcome is use.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the things, again, that's coming up for me, and personally as someone who's navigated mental health and addictions, I very much, and I when I was looking at the philosophy and the backboning, the frameworks of the work that you're doing, I very much see how part of my recovery, it very much was in that place of addressing the person, addressing the whole person, building up self. So it was very different than traditional approaches to treatment. And what I find fascinating, and not to go too personal on you here, is that because I've been able to have, I would say, substantive success post some of those episodes, those seasons of my life, because I haven't relapsed or because I haven't had those moments, people then have the story that, well, it wasn't that bad. Like it couldn't be that bad because you're supposed to have, years and years and decades of a mess. And, well, it probably wasn't that bad then. And it's like, but when we actually get the right, when the person is able to get to a place where there is a component of acceptance, there's a component of grace, where we focus on again, building that kind of, what we talk about is signature strengths, where instead of focusing on the weaknesses or the limitations of my mental health and my, learning disabilities, ADHD, like I have a whole laundry list. When I leaned over to signature strength approach, it radically transformed my experience. And then you have a new story. So if you relapse, you're a failure. And if you succeed, it wasn't that bad. Like it feels like we're trapped in this wicked cycle where are we supposed to ever find solid footing?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. This is the stuff they talk about in narrative therapy too, which is what if we talked about you in relationship to this instead of this defining you?
Exactly.
The narrative therapists say the person isn't the problem is the problem. And so how do we build a relationship with that, including where are the places where you've been courageous in the face of it?
Yes.
Right. It's not saying just let's focus on your courage. It's talking about where have you done well with this? Even where has this helped you in your life? This problem we're calling a problem, where has it actually worked? And having that kind of a conversation is where you build a new narrative and a new story that actually is deeper. It's not just a new narrative. It's a deeper, more complex, thick narrative. It has more to it. Yeah. And the thing you described before, it's really serious in trauma work because when a person recovers from trauma, people think, well, then the trauma not have been that bad.
Exactly.
And so your trauma becomes this memorial to what happened. And if you get well, you're kind of like doing that sacrilegious thing of destroying the memorial, right? Yeah. And so that becomes a dynamic in that work. So tell me what the things were that you feel were the elements in your recovery.
Oh, I love this question. So for me, very much my faith system. Right. Having faith in myself, faith in my family, and also faith in, I happen to be a faith-filled person who has a religious practice that gave me enormous amounts of courage and also the opportunity for acceptance and surrender. And I also very much did with that, as I said, with that signature strength, realizing, as you described in narrative therapy, that with, ADHD, when channeled, ADHD is so powerful in terms of allowing us to do certain things when we recognize we're going to do it in a different way. And so very much embracing some of what to others they might perceive as a problem. For me, realizing and just getting to know myself better, it was actually something that really gave me some substantive unlocks. And the thread, though, that I'm so curious about your work and where I see this intersection. When I had a very challenging, adolescence and, catastrophic car accident, all of a sudden I'm rebuilding. I actually leaned into education and focusing, like hyper focus on school, because I didn't have the social skills. I couldn't be friends with the people I was friends with before. And I was kind of a lone wolf for a while. And I realized I didn't really know how to do the social part. So that was something that took, I would say, the longest to start
Uh-huh.
to understand and
Yeah.
appreciate. Family consistent along the way, but the social part, that took me a long time to figure out.
Yeah. And where were you with the social part when you were at that place in your recovery?
Oh, interesting. So very isolated. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't put myself out there. And again,
Yeah.
because of all the old stories we carry
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of shame and, that even just that disclosure, like as somebody who's, off in college, off in university, like, I didn't want to get into it with everybody. So it was easier just to keep my head in books, and it served me
Yeah.
well though. Right. It would,
Yeah.
got, bunch of degrees, right? Like it was like, hey,
That's
that
right.
worked out
That's
well.
right.
But
That's right.
again, the healing and that evolution, especially around the social component, I would say that didn't happen until like almost 2 decades later, when I started to see that I felt brave enough to start putting myself out there for friendships.
Yeah. That's actually like, it's the hardest stage on some level. I mean, in our work with our clients, if a client actually making friends outside of the mental health system means they're done.
Yes.
I mean, that means like, that's okay. You're done. All you need is now a psychiatrist and a therapist, and see the therapist once a month. I mean, that is like, you're just really there at that point, that's like really, yeah. So my work comes out of the fact that I was diagnosed with ADD, and in a way that was very, very disruptive for my experience. In a way that labeling, and the fact that back then that meant that they were going to try to put me in a special school and things like that labeling had much more power over my dysfunction than any dysfunction.
Yes.
And I'm not even sure it's a dysfunction. I think that some of us don't factory learn, and
I love that.
Now,
the whole space. I love, some of us don't factory learn. Like, oh my gosh, I just felt like a wash of like, yes, Dr. Ross, that's exactly what it is. And I do remember being pulled out of school in like grade 4 and put in a special classroom because, again, I wasn't fitting the model of that particular way of teaching.
Yeah. Mine was, so mine was really wacky too, because they said, you got to go to the special school because you're broken and da-da-da-da. And my parents fought that. They kept me in the regular school. And then a couple of months later, they said, we'd like you to go into this class for gifted kids.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute. So I can't learn, but I'm going to the gifted class kid. It's sort of insane. But so now when I give talks, I say, I tell the story. And then I say, what I figured out is I think poetically. And I'm going to give this talk poetically. You, the audience, are going to have to deal with the fact I'm not going to do this sort of, linear PowerPoint.
Yes.
I'm going to improvise, and I'm going to think about art, and I'm going to have conversations in an artistic way. And that's me living through the way I think. And that has opened up so much for me. It's so much more fun to be in front of people and more interesting. And I think they find it more interesting too. It's a little, becomes not a boring talk, but that's where I've come to, is that us learning disabled people, quote unquote, think more like artists about life.
Yeah. I think that's so beautifully said. And I find what's so amazing is when we think about, more creative ways of expression. And so often, even with gifted programs, we're using universal instructional design. We're allowing people to show what they know in different ways. And that benefits all learners, not just the folks that fit into the system. And I know when I was teaching in the university, I loved using universal instructional design, allowing people opportunity to show different ways of what you know or how you got to what you know. And the conversations were so much richer, so much more meaningful than that, very kind of A plus B equals C, like that very linear way that we think we are supposed to learn. So if we have this system that still does, in your language, factory learning, which is so absolutely such an accurate way to describe it. If we have a system and we have a learner or a person who is experiencing mental health episodes, especially in our adolescence, how do we navigate those two worlds where this is the system that the world has taught us that they have to go through this system to be able to get to a
Mm-hmm.
future. And we know that it doesn't work for a learner. And as parents and supporters and guardians, where do we find a way through when we're not sure that the system is congruent to our learner?
Yeah. I mean, I think that these questions are highly complex because they have all kinds of layers to it,
Right.
So one issue, and I don't know what to do about it, is we don't live in communities anymore. So there's no, you're talking about parents having to figure this out, not communities having to figure this out. And that's really wrong.
Agreed.
Parents should not be in charge only of their kids.
Mm-hmm.
There should be a community that is considering that child and how that community is raising him. And without that, it's very hard.
Yeah.
But I do think a strong enough family can walk a kid through this and walk them through the risk of creative learning, homeschooling them or letting them drop out on some level, whatever it takes. But it's very risky. Yes. And the other is find those schools if you got the money, and that's the problem, where there's some respect for it. The Waldorf system has that. All these sorts of different school systems, these ways of doing things actually appreciate different ways of learning.
Yes.
But that's going to cost you money. And so this is really, it isn't provided in our school districts. It's not. It really is a kind of, it's really about making kids learn how to conform.
Right. Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And that to me is to me, there's a psychiatric diagnosis that I'm developing, that I think is the most terrifying of all the diagnoses, the most destructive, most terrifying diagnosis. And the diagnosis is normal. Mm-hmm. Normal is the worst diagnosis. It is terrifying to meet a normal person. Mm-hmm. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I mean, so many normal people. I got to get out of this town, by the way. It's driving me crazy. But they're all normal, and it's just, and they're in their golf carts and they're doing this and that. And it's like, oh my God, these are normal people, and it's. I hope my neighbors don't see this. I love my neighbors. Let me just say that really quick. Of course you do. But I'm saying, like, normal is the depressed bachelorette parties on Sunday morning, all hungover, walking to get their brunch. The normal is, it's just normal is this horrifying existence. And so our schools are kind of training us to be normal. And so are our mental health institutions. So are our addiction places, Yeah.
Yeah. And I love in your work where I read how you talk about, like, especially in mental health treatment, that, people have been identified as being broken or having a problem, and then they are even more broken if they don't fit into this prescribed treatment that we say fixes that condition. Right. And I really appreciate, and that's why I thought it was such a refreshing approach to hear that, because what we're saying is we have decided, without knowing you, without knowing your story, understanding your context, we've decided that you have this label, and we've decided that this medication, this treatment, this approach fixes this label. Right. And if you don't fit in that, you're extra broken. Like you're extra deep, and even to the point of deviant resistant, and then we say, well, you're even more complex. And again, I just think, where else do we have in terms of a problem solution model that we're identifying the problem, we name the problem, we name the solution. And if you don't fit, you're broken. It absolutely is faulty logic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting that logic regarding addiction actually, took off on some level. It's always been there, but it really took off when the Parity Act came into place, where and venture capital went into addiction treatment. Mm-hmm. And think about that logic as the most remarkable sales pitch ever. Exactly. Which is, hey, you're broken. You got to come and see me. Mm-hmm. If you don't come see me, something's wrong with you. Yeah, but my parents say I don't need to see you. Yeah, but that's because your parents are broken too. Yeah. Like, that's just brilliant. That's like you can't beat that sales pitch. Model.
Totally.
It's so great, but it's also so destructive because with addiction treatment, especially, most likely outcome is use. It has some effect. It doesn't have a great effect. So you're saying this is the only thing you can do? Mm-hmm. I think that falling in love probably has a pretty good effect on addiction. I think that getting back to work probably has and it's pretty much proven.
Yes.
if you look at the main indicators of what helps a recovery, treatment is like number 5. Number 1 is social support. Number 2 is what's called sobriety capital, which is just having an ordered life. Number 3 is like purpose and meaning. So those are things that are out there in the community, not stuck in some program.
Yes.
And that's the medicine for addiction. And most programs are saying you can't have that medicine until you're well. Right? Don't date, don't get a job, don't do this. You got to focus on your addiction.
Yeah. Avoid stress.
They're keeping the medicine away from the person.
Yes.
And then the other side of it that I find fascinating is they've decided to name it a disease. There's no proof it's a disease. It follows the pattern of a disease, maybe. I've come up with a brilliant term for addiction, by the way. It's addiction. I think it's a pretty great term.
Yeah.
So they've come with this idea that it's a disease, and then they say you're diseased, and if you show any signs of that disease, we can't treat you.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is.
Right. And so that's producing failure after failure after failure through that, So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Dr. Ross, this is so refreshing. And what I'm just really leaning into is just hearing someone in your field, in the caliber of the research you've done, the communities that you have built, like there's so much hope here. And even in my book, I talk about how in the medical model, when somebody has a diagnosis, let's say somebody was diagnosed with cancer or someone was diagnosed with whatever that medical model disease is, people show up with casseroles. People run 5-kilometer races. People do charity events. Everybody leans in and we're going to rally around that person. And if somebody says, my child was just diagnosed with schizophrenia, all of a sudden there are no casseroles. No, very few people are leaning in. Very few people are saying we're going to beat this. Let's talk about recovery. Let's talk about quality of life. We're basically it's this life sentence, and we lose the social community that is very much, as you're describing, what we need most in those moments.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And, and I just, love the idea of how you are anchoring hope, recognizing that there is a natural fear to hope, because ultimately we are trying to protect our hope, because we know on some deep level instinctually that it is so important to us to be able to have it. And what you're showing and what you're sharing is that there are other approaches when we think about diagnosis, when we think about addiction, where hope is part of the conversation, and it's a critical part of the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I got a couple of responses to that. One is that if that family had a kid who was drunk driving and was arrested and was sent to prison, I think the neighbors might come out and support them. And so what the mental health system has done, which is really not true, is said, we're going to free mentally ill people from a moral obligation. Because if we can make it look like it's not a moral issue, they won't people will want to hang out with them. So we'll call it a brain disease. Well, stigma was invented to protect us from disease. And it's proven that if people go into a room and they're told that group is mentally ill and that group are criminals, they'll sit closer to the criminals than
the mentally ill. Yes.
So they're selling this idea of anti-stigma as we can get rid of stigma by saying it's a brain disease. It's not. That creates the stigma. And the reason why people aren't coming is because it's a sense of contagion from it, this sense that it, and then the other thing I want to say is the things I'm talking about, I've been talking about for 20 years. And I've given these talks at all the major psychiatric institutions.
Yes.
Nobody disagrees with me. And increasingly, people are talking in this way. So there's something going on in the institutions that kind of keep people doing this kind of version. But most people from their heart, I'm not talking about anything new to them.
Yes.
They get it. It's not, they get it. They just get it. And so
intuitively, it's intuitive truth. We recognize as truth because it makes sense. We understand community. We understand belonging. We understand that role of that social connection. We understand it absolutely. And the systems around it, there seems to be a disconnect.
Yeah. When you say intuitive truth, what do you mean?
What I mean is when we hear something and it almost like, I like to think about it, not to go too woo woo, but I still think the science behind it is it bypasses all of the things that we have been taught to think. It bypasses some of the kind of norms, and we literally feel it intuitively that it rings as truth. And, same as that, it's like, to me, it's an instinctual recognizing that happens. And I do believe that's maybe, generational and, ancestral wisdom that's passed down to us, where it's the same as, we go near fire and we recognize we shouldn't touch it. Like there are certain things I believe in our structure. And, again, we could talk about family systems theory, it could be attachment, but there's certain things that we just know to be true and we recognize it as truth.
Yeah. So that's close to what William James called noetic truth, which is this, it's the truth we actually give more authority to. We just don't admit it.
Yes.
Which is felt truth. And that felt truth we've known longer than narrated truth, because everything in infancy were these truths. They just weren't languaged. The truth of comfort, the truth of discomfort, the truth of abandonment, the truth. There was no like, am I being abandoned?
Yes.
There's the truth. This is happening right now.
Yes.
And so to me, it might be ancestral, but it's ancestral in the sense that it's within our own life course, that we went through a period of life where the noetic was the thing that deciding what was true. And I actually ask people when I meet with groups, I say, tell me the things you know are absolutely true. Nobody ever says that theory of relativity or that I'm breathing air or that I'm standing on the ground. They say love, connection, devotion. Yeah. And so those truths have gotten squashed in our society. They used to be kind of central, in traditional societies, it was all about dealing with the noetic, maybe placing it on deities and God, but it was still that thing. And I don't want to make you and I sound too special, but I do think that people with learning disabilities are a little frustrated with the world because we kind of live in the noetic.
Yes.
And then people don't know what the hell we're talking about when we say, well, I feel this way. And they're like, well, that feel isn't as good as knowing.
That's right.
And so we feel a little lost in that world. You know?
I remember when growing up, one of the ways that I got very much stifled and with a sibling was, I'll talk to you if you take the emotion out of it. Take the emotion out of it, Robyne, right? You have to I won't talk to you unless you conform to, we're just going to talk about, this, we have to do it in this logical way because, again, that idea that thinking is this higher order of knowing versus anything to do with emotional self or our spiritual selves. So I see very much how that changes how we see ourselves in community. And when we find our people, when we find the right system that say, and, even I remember being interviewed years ago, Dr. Ross on a podcast, and it was around Valentine's Day. And the interviewer asked me, why did you, pick your partner? Like, you've had some, unsuccessful relationships. How did you kind of put yourself back out there? And I said, without even batting an eye, I said, because he's so good for my nervous system. And like literally my husband is like, whenever I'm around him, my nervous system can just exhale. It's like the safety, this attachment to security. And I remember very early on, my husband saying to me, you don't have to be easy to love. Like I'm okay with, like, I can handle this. And when you find your people, right, all of a sudden you can accept those different parts of yourself in a pretty substantive way. And you realize that, again, I love how you said not to call us special, but I love that we are coming to a place where we have more acceptance of different ways of being in the world, and it's okay.
And
I love that.
I love what you have to say there too. But like you and I have been talking and we've been using words to get at the noetic, and we can get confused that the words are the thing. Like all these therapies that are considered like best practices, they're all about like this prescribed way of doing things, instead of the idea that the therapeutic conversation is about what this psychoanalyst Christopher Bollas calls the unthought known.
Yes, I love this.
You're using these words to get to the unthought known. You're not using these words to state facts about what's happening for the person. Because experience is an unthought known thing, and you're trying to get to their experience of stuff and what it's like to be with the world, not what it's like to define the world, Yes. And we're losing that in psychotherapy. In some ways, it's becoming more and more this kind of prescribed thing,
Yes. Dr. Ross, I could talk to you for days. I love this. One final question, if that's okay, if I can land this plane. One, with the world being so unwell, right? Like the reality, we look around news headings like, gosh, the world feels like it's going to hell in a handbasket. What is a strategy or an approach that you use personally to keep your hopes up?
I'm just trying very hard to be near my family. So we're going to move soon just so I can be near my son. I feel like we're in serious trouble, this country.
Yes.
And to survive it, we got to do the only thing that we're still liberated to do, which is to love and be connected to our loved ones and spend time with them, that they can't get to that. They can't hurt that as long as we're allowed to be with each other and not locked up somewhere. And then to focus on protecting others.
Yes.
I think that activism is remarkably important. Direct action and activism is remarkably important. But what we learned in Minnesota is that caring for people is a kind of protest.
Yes.
And we should be finding ways to really look out for people. I had family that died in Germany, I think they would be more interested in someone who hid them and did something for them than someone protesting for them. Nothing wrong with direct action and protest. It's vital. But this other thing of taking care of each other is super important. How do we protect these refugees? What do we do? What are the ways in which we can make sure they're safe? To me, that generates some hope in me because I feel like I'm being effective in some way,
Yeah. Beautifully said, Dr. Ross. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights, your gifts. And I hope to have you back soon. I absolutely, in my heart of hearts, know that this will bring a lot of hope to a lot of families, a lot of people hearing your approach. And we'll make sure to include information about your program and more of your work in our show notes so folks could reach out and learn more about it. And again, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for enlightening us today and the gift of sharing your perspective. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you're good at this.
Thanks.
You made this really fun.
I'm so pleased.
Good.
Thank you for that. Okay, you take good care. We'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you for spending time with me on this episode of Life by Design. I appreciate if you have a moment to pay this forward, share it with someone who you think might benefit from the ideas shared in this episode. If you're feeling so inspired, please also rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Again, thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.